Claire often told herself that love, like a house, could look pristine from the street, while hiding rot behind the walls. Still, when people looked at her and Daniel, they saw nothing but perfection. Neighbors praised them as the couple who had it all: charm, stability, and a home that seemed to glow with warmth each evening. At dinner parties, friends joked that they were the type of marriage one might frame in glossy magazines. Claire always smiled politely at such remarks, though a part of her wondered how many cracks they were overlooking. She adored Daniel, of course, or at least the version of him that greeted her in public. He was attentive, chivalrous in a way that seemed old-fashioned. He touched the small of her back when they walked into rooms, filled her glass before she realized it was empty, and told the kind of carefully chosen stories that made people lean closer. Yet in private, the warmth sometimes cooled into silence. Nights would pass in which Daniel sat reading in his locked study, leaving Claire alone with the faint hum of the dishwasher and the cold tick of the clock. She tried to rationalize these gaps. After all, every marriage had its quiet moments, but sometimes the silence wasn't neutral. It was weighted, as though Daniel's mind occupied places he could never share with her. Once she caught his expression reflected in the window. His face, usually composed, was drawn tight, almost grim, before he noticed her gaze and smiled as if nothing were wrong. Narration carried Claire deeper into memories of their early years. Their courtship had been swift, passionate, full of the dizzying certainty that fate had brought them together. Daniel worked in finance, steady and predictable, while she had pursued her photography, capturing fleeting images of life's imperfections. Opposites had seemed to balance each other then, yet balance could also mean fragility. When she thought of him now, she thought of two Daniels, the one who kissed her forehead every morning with gentle devotion, and the one whose eyes sometimes glazed over with an emptiness she could not name. It was this dissonance that unsettled her, the fear that she might be sleeping beside a stranger. Their house was immaculate, not because Claire loved order, but because Daniel demanded it. "A tidy home keeps the mind at peace," he often said. She obliged, though there were times she longed to leave dishes unwashed or laundry unfolded, to see if Daniel's calm exterior would crack. She never did. Something about his insistence carried an edge, subtle but undeniable, like a blade pressed gently against the skin, threat more than wound. Theirs was a marriage admired by others, but lived in shadows. Claire didn't yet know whether the shadows belonged to her imagination, or to Daniel himself. Still, she couldn't shake the feeling that every perfect smile he offered was hiding a door she wasn't meant to open. And one evening, she would discover that door wasn't a metaphor at all. It was a locked study, waiting for her curiosity to turn the handle. The first time Claire noticed the study door locked, she brushed it off as nothing. Daniel had always been particular about his space, organized, meticulous, drawn to order, in a way that made him seem steady, dependable. He said it was his sanctuary, the one place in the house where his thoughts could breathe without distraction. She accepted that explanation, though a quiet unease took root. At first, the room seemed ordinary enough from the outside, a plain oak door at the end of the hall, its brass handle gleaming. But the lock changed everything. It was not the kind of door meant to be locked. Families did not place bolts on home offices. Couples did not keep secrets sealed behind keys. Claire tried to ignore it, telling herself that boundaries existed even in love. Still, the nights betrayed her. Sometimes long after Daniel had excused himself to work late, she would hear faint noises from within, drawers sliding, paper rustling, the low murmur of his voice as though speaking to someone. More than once she crept from bed and pressed her ear to the cool wood. Silence followed each attempt, as if he sensed her standing there. When she asked about the noises, Daniel chuckled softly, his tone patient, almost fatherly. "I talk to myself sometimes when I'm sorting accounts," he explained. "Numbers behave better when you scold them." The answer was charming on the surface, but Claire felt the weight beneath it, the practiced rhythm of a man who anticipated suspicion and knew how to disarm it. During the day, he remained affectionate, attentive in small gestures, a hand brushing hers while pouring coffee, a quick kiss before heading to the office. To anyone else, their marriage looked enviable. Yet for Claire, the locked door grew larger each day, casting a long shadow over every tender moment. Her photography began to reflect this dread. Once drawn to capturing light, she now found herself photographing corners, half-closed doors, and fractured reflections in mirrors. Subconsciously, she was recording the shape of her unease. One evening, as Daniel left the study and locked it behind him, Claire caught the faintest metallic smell clinging to his shirt. It was gone before she could name it, but it lingered in her mind like a whisper she wasn't supposed to hear. She asked no questions. He kissed her cheek and told her he loved her. Still, she lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, listening for sounds in the hallway. And when a sharp knock echoed on their front door the next evening, Claire felt her stomach tighten. She sensed that whoever stood outside might carry answers she wasn't ready to face. The knock at the door was sharp, deliberate, 3 raps that seemed to echo through the house. Claire, still unsettled from the sleepless night before, hesitated before answering. Daniel, always composed, opened it with his usual easy charm. On the porch stood a woman Claire had never seen before. She was striking in a disheveled way, pale skin, dark hair tangled by the wind, and eyes that darted nervously from Claire to Daniel. "Daniel," the woman said, her voice low but urgent. "We need to talk." Claire froze. The familiarity in her tone cut like a blade. Daniel stiffened, though only for an instant before he forced a smile. "I think you have the wrong house," he replied smoothly, stepping slightly into the doorway, blocking Claire's view of the woman. But the woman leaned forward. "Don't do this. Not again." "She deserves to know." Claire's pulse quickened. "Know what?" she asked, her voice breaking the uneasy standoff. Daniel turned, his expression carefully arranged. "Nothing, Claire." "She's confused." "I don't know her." He reached for the door, but the woman caught it with a trembling hand. "You do know me," she whispered fiercely. "You can't just erase the past." The words hung between them like smoke. Claire studied Daniel's face, searching for the cracks. His jaw tightened, but he smiled again, the practiced smile she had seen 1,000 times at dinner parties. "Please leave," he said softly as though speaking to a child. Reluctantly, the woman stepped back. "This isn't over," she murmured, eyes lingering on Claire before she disappeared into the night. Daniel shut the door with quiet finality. For a moment, silence consumed the house. Then he sighed, shaking his head. "She's unstable. People like that. They attach themselves to strangers and invent stories. Ignore her." Claire wanted to believe him, but the certainty in the woman's voice unsettled her. "Daniel," she asked slowly, "are you sure you don't know her?" He laughed lightly, as though the question itself were absurd. "Of course not. You're letting her madness get to you." He touched her arm gently, his tone soothing, confident. "Trust me." Later, lying awake beside him, Claire replayed the encounter. The woman's eyes, the urgency in her words, Daniel's too perfect calm. It all gnawed at her. Doubt took root, twining through her thoughts, poisoning every affectionate gesture. And the very next morning, while gathering laundry, Claire would stumble across something that made belief impossible. A rag streaked with blood, damp and hidden at the bottom of the hamper. Claire almost missed it. She was emptying the hamper, sorting through shirts and towels when her fingers brushed against fabric that felt damp, heavy. Pulling it free, she froze. The rag was streaked with dark red stains, stiff in places where the blood had dried. Her breath hitched. For a long moment she stood there, the laundry room spinning around her. It could have been anything, she told herself. An accident, a nosebleed. But the memory of the strange woman's words, "She deserves to know," rushed back, hollowing her chest with dread. She carried the rag to the kitchen, where Daniel stood rinsing a glass at the sink. "What is this?" Her voice cracked, fragile. Daniel glanced at the rag, then at her. His expression didn't falter. He gave a small laugh, shaking his head. "Oh, that. I nicked my hand on a file drawer last night. Nothing serious." He held up his palm to show a thin, almost invisible cut. The explanation was simple, harmless. Too simple, too harmless. Claire stared at him, searching his face for something. Hesitation, guilt, anything real. Instead, she found calm certainty, his eyes steady as if rehearsed for this exact moment. "You should have told me," she whispered. "I didn't want to worry you over something trivial," Daniel replied, stepping closer. He set the rag aside and wrapped his arms around her. His embrace was warm, protective, but Claire felt no comfort in it, only the chill of being pulled tighter into something she could not name. Her thoughts tangled. Perhaps he was telling the truth. Perhaps she was overreacting, letting paranoia twist the ordinary into something sinister. That's what Daniel always said, that she let her imagination run away with her. Yet the smell lingered in her nose, metallic, undeniable. As he kissed her forehead, murmuring that everything was fine, Claire stood rigid, her heart pounding. Fine, he always said things were fine. But that night, she lay awake again, staring into the dark. The rag haunted her thoughts. The calm in his voice echoed too smoothly. And for the first time, a terrifying question formed clearly in her mind. What else is he hiding? The next evening, Claire's doubts would break through. The fragile illusion of calm would shatter in the quiet of their bedroom, when whispers would turn into confrontation. The house was silent except for the distant hum of the refrigerator. Claire sat on the edge of the bed, her hands clenched in her lap, the weight of the blood-stained rag pressing at the edges of her mind. She couldn't bear the silence anymore. When Daniel entered the room, loosening his tie, she blurted out, "You're lying to me." He stopped mid-step. His expression barely changed, just the faintest narrowing of his eyes before he smiled. "About what, Claire?" "The rag, the cut. That woman at the door." Her voice rose, sharp, breaking. "You keep telling me everything is fine, but it's not. I hear you at night. I see the way you hide things." Daniel exhaled slowly, as if weary of her accusations. He sat beside her, lowering his tone to something soft, controlled. "Claire, listen to yourself. Do you hear how paranoid you sound?" "I'm not paranoid." Her voice trembled. "You're keeping secrets from me." He laughed quietly, not with humor but with a kind of sorrowful patience. "This is what happens when you spend too much time alone with your thoughts. You invent monsters where there are none." He reached for her hand, but she pulled away. "Don't do that," she whispered. "Don't make me feel crazy." Daniel's eyes gleamed in the dim light. "I don't have to make you feel anything. You're doing it to yourself. Claire, I've given you everything, this home, security, love, and this is how you repay me? With suspicion." Her chest tightened. The words landed with precision, cutting deeper than any raised voice could have. Guilt washed over her even as doubt still burned inside. She faltered, searching for clarity. "I just want the truth." "And the truth," Daniel said firmly, tilting her chin to meet his gaze, "is that you're imagining things. That woman was unstable, the rag was nothing. You need to trust me. If you can't trust me, what do we have?" The question lingered, heavy with unspoken threat. Claire felt her anger collapse under the weight of his certainty. Tears stung her eyes, but she forced a nod. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the apology escaping her lips before she realized it. Daniel kissed her forehead gently, his touch a mixture of comfort and control. "That's all I ask. Trust." Later, as the house settled into silence once more, Claire lay awake, hollow with self-doubt. She had confronted him, yet somehow she was the one apologizing. And the next morning, when the doorbell rang and a detective introduced himself, asking about recent disappearances in the neighborhood, Claire's unease would surge back with brutal force. The doorbell rang just after breakfast, sharp and authoritative. Claire wiped her hands on a dish towel, her stomach tightening as Daniel moved past her to open the door. A man stood there, broad-shouldered, his trench coat damp from a recent drizzle. His expression was serious but not unfriendly. "Detective Harris," he introduced, flashing a badge. "I'm looking into some recent disappearances in the neighborhood. I was hoping to ask you both a few questions." Claire's breath caught. Daniel, however, greeted him with calm civility. "Of course. Please come in." The detective stepped into their immaculate living room, eyes scanning the framed photographs, the neatly stacked books. Claire perched on the edge of the sofa, while Daniel settled beside her, his hand resting lightly on her knee as if to anchor her. "Several women have gone missing over the past 6 months," Harris explained. "We're speaking with local residents, seeing if anyone noticed anything unusual. Strangers, odd noises, disturbances. Did either of you happen to see or hear anything?" Claire opened her mouth, but Daniel spoke first. Nothing at all. This is the first I'm hearing of it. Tragic. His tone was smooth, sympathetic, perfectly measured. Claire glanced at him, unsettled by how quickly the words left his lips, as though rehearsed. She cleared her throat. I did hear something once at night. But I thought it was just Daniel working late. Harris's gaze shifted toward her. What kind of noises? Daniel's hand tightened on her knee. Claire is imaginative, he said gently, smiling at her before turning back to the detective. She means creaks, the house settling. Nothing unusual. Harris studied Daniel for a long moment, his brow furrowing slightly. If you remember anything specific, Mrs. Wallace, please reach out. He handed her a card, his eyes lingering on hers as though he sensed hesitation beneath her silence. Daniel accepted the card instead, slipping it into his pocket with a polite nod. We'll be sure to do that. After Harris left, the house felt colder. Claire turned to Daniel, searching for some flicker of unease, but his face was composed, his voice even. Don't let this get in your head, he murmured. You've been anxious enough lately. But as Claire lay awake that night, her mind replayed the detective's steady gaze. For the first time, she wondered if her doubts weren't madness after all. And when she rose to get water, passing Daniel's locked study, she noticed the faint outline of a key hidden beneath his desk blotter, a key that seemed to whisper her name. The discovery of the key gnawed at Claire's thoughts until she could no longer resist. The following afternoon, while Daniel was away at work, she stood in the hallway, heart hammering, the small brass key trembling in her hand. For years she had respected that locked door, convincing herself it was just a husband's need for privacy. Now, with Detective Harris's warning echoing in her ears, she slid the key into the lock. The study opened with a soft click, the air inside cool and still. Sunlight slanted through the blinds, catching dust motes that drifted like tiny ghosts. At first glance, the room looked ordinary. Orderly shelves, neatly stacked files, a desk aligned with military precision. Yet the longer she stood there, the more oppressive the silence felt, as though the room itself resented her intrusion. She moved cautiously, her eyes skimming the tidy surfaces. It wasn't until she pulled open the bottom drawer of the desk that she found it. A leather-bound journal, worn at the edges, its cover unmarked. Claire hesitated before opening it, her pulse thundering. The first pages seemed benign, lists, observations, fragments of thoughts. But as she read on, her blood ran cold. Words like control, obedience, and sacrifice surfaced again and again, written in Daniel's careful hand. Paragraphs described women in chilling detail, their appearances, their habits, the way they resisted or submitted. Some descriptions were eerily familiar, echoes of the women whose photographs had been broadcast on the news. Claire's throat tightened as she turned another page. There, in neat lines, was a passage about the perfect mask, how love could be both a weapon and a shield. The writing was clinical, detached, as though Daniel were documenting an experiment rather than a relationship. Her fingers trembled as she flipped further, landing on an entry that made her knees weaken. She trusts me completely. That trust is power. One day it will demand a price. The pronouns shifted, vague enough to obscure but intimate enough to wound. Was he writing about her? Or someone else before her? A noise in the hallway made her snap the journal shut. Fear surged through her veins. Though she knew Daniel wasn't due home for hours, she quickly returned the book to its place, locked the study, and fled to the bedroom, her heart pounding with every step. That evening, when Daniel returned, his smile felt sharper, his eyes lingering too long on her face. For the first time, Claire wondered if he already knew what she had done. And in that moment, his mask of perfection seemed to slip, just slightly, revealing the shadow beneath. Dinner that night was different. Daniel's smile, once effortless, seemed forced, stretched too tight across his face. He asked about her day in a tone that was polite but edged with scrutiny, as though weighing every word she spoke. Claire answered carefully, her mind still haunted by the journal she had returned to his desk. He noticed her hesitation. "You've been quiet," he said, his fork pausing mid-air. "Is something wrong?" She forced a smile. "Just tired," his gaze lingered. "You've been tired a lot lately." The statement wasn't concern, it was accusation. From that moment, the cracks in his facade widened. Daniel grew increasingly possessive, monitoring her routines, questioning the smallest details. If she went for a walk, he wanted to know the route. If she spoke too long on the phone, he asked who it was. His voice remained calm, but his eyes sharpened with suspicion. One evening, when she tried to step outside to photograph the sunset, he stopped her at the door. "Stay in tonight," he said, his hand firm on her arm. "We don't need you wandering around when people are disappearing." The words should have sounded protective, but Claire felt the command beneath them. At night, the study door seemed louder in its silence, its secrets pressing against her mind. She could not forget the journal's words, nor the eerie precision of Daniel's entries. Each time he reached for her hand, she felt less like a wife and more like a possession. The battleground of their marriage was invisible but suffocating. He never raised his voice, but his control seeped into every corner of her life. What she wore, where she went, even the rhythm of her breathing beside him in bed. Claire learned to mask her fear with compliance, smiling when he demanded reassurance, apologizing when he accused her of doubts. Yet behind her careful obedience, her resolve hardened. The detective's card burned in her memory, and so did the journal's chilling promises. If Daniel's mask was slipping, it meant the danger was no longer hidden. It was here, in their home, in the way his eyes lingered too long in the dark, and Claire knew if she didn't act soon, she might never get the chance. Claire clutched the detective's card in her trembling hand for days before daring to use it. One afternoon, while Daniel was at the office, she dialed the number. Her voice shook as she whispered into the phone, "Detective Harris. It's Claire Wallace. I think my husband is hiding something. I found writings." Silence, then Harris's steady tone. "Mrs. Wallace, I need you to be careful. Tell me exactly what you found." She described the journal in fragments, enough to convey its darkness without risking too much detail if Daniel somehow overheard. Harris didn't sound surprised. Instead, his voice carried grim certainty. "We've suspected him, but without proof we can't act. I need your help." The words chilled her. Suspected him. The confirmation that her fears were real both terrified and steeled her. "What do I have to do?" she whispered. They devised a plan. Harris would monitor quietly, waiting for the moment Daniel's mask slipped completely. Claire would continue to play the role of loyal wife, buying time while providing subtle clues, where Daniel went at night, when he locked himself in the study, what she could uncover without raising suspicion. The days that followed were unbearable theater. At breakfast, she smiled across the table, listening to his calm voice, nodding at his stories. At night, she lay in his arms, feeling the weight of the secret pressed between them. Every glance, every touch carried the risk of exposure. Daniel's scrutiny sharpened. "You've been different lately," he murmured one evening, eyes narrowing. "Distant." Claire forced a laugh, reaching to brush his cheek. "Just stress. You know me." But behind her smile, her pulse thundered. Each word of affection felt like poison, a betrayal disguised as devotion. Meanwhile, Harris fed her quiet instructions through carefully timed calls. "Keep him calm. Don't confront him. When the time comes, we'll be ready." One night, after Daniel disappeared into his study, Claire slipped outside to meet Harris at the edge of the street. The detective's face was grim under the street lamp. "He's planning something soon. You need to be prepared," Claire nodded, fear and determination colliding within her. She was no longer merely doubting, no longer questioning her own sanity. She was certain. When she returned to the house, Daniel was waiting in the hallway, his smile sharp, his eyes unreadable. "Out for some fresh air?" he asked softly. Her throat tightened. She forced another smile. Yes, just needed to breathe. But she knew the next move would be Daniel's, and it would come soon. The house felt different that evening. Too still, too deliberate. Claire sensed it the moment Daniel stepped through the door. His movements were precise, almost ceremonial, as he hung his coat and loosened his tie. He watched her longer than usual, his gaze fixed, unreadable. "Claire," he said finally, his tone low and inviting. "I think it's time we talked. Properly." Her stomach tightened. "About what?" He smiled, the kind of smile that never touched his eyes. "About us. About everything." He gestured toward the locked study. "Come inside with me." Her breath caught. For weeks she had imagined what lay beyond that door, and now he was inviting her in, not with secrecy, but with a chilling kind of intimacy. She hesitated, but his hand rested lightly on her shoulder, guiding her forward. The study smelled faintly of paper and something metallic. Daniel closed the door behind them with quiet finality. "You've been suspicious of me," he began, leaning against the desk. "I can see it in your eyes. You think I'm hiding something terrible." Claire's heart pounded. "Aren't you?" she whispered. He chuckled, soft and controlled. "Marriage requires trust, Claire. But you've been digging, haven't you? Snooping where you shouldn't." His gaze sharpened. "Tell me, what did you find?" She froze, every nerve screaming. If she confessed to the journal, the facade would shatter. Yet lying felt equally dangerous. "Nothing," she said carefully. "I just worry." Daniel's expression softened in a way that felt rehearsed. "I don't want to hurt you, Claire. I only want to protect what we have." He stepped closer, his shadow swallowing hers. "But protection demands loyalty. Absolute loyalty." Her pulse hammered in her ears. This was the moment Detective Harris had warned her about, the moment the mask slipped entirely. She forced her voice steady. "And what about them, Daniel? The women who disappeared?" His eyes flickered. For the first time, his calm cracked. "They were weak," he said, almost too quietly. "They trusted too easily. But you, Claire, you're stronger." The words chilled her to the bone. "You hurt them," she whispered. His smile curved, thin and terrifying. "I tested them. And they failed. But you—" He reached for her face. "You won't fail me." Claire flinched, but before he could touch her, the front door burst open. "Police!" Harris's voice thundered through the house. Daniel's head snapped toward the sound, rage igniting in his eyes. In that split second of distraction, Claire moved. She shoved the journal across the desk toward Harris, who had stormed into the room with 2 officers. The mask finally shattered. Daniel lunged, but the officers restrained him, his calm composure collapsing into guttural fury. His voice echoed through the study, venomous and raw. "You betrayed me, Claire. You'll regret this." Claire stood frozen, tears streaming, her body trembling but unbroken. As Harris secured Daniel in handcuffs, he met her eyes. It's over, yet Claire knew it wasn't over. Not truly. The trial awaited, the world's judgment, and her own reckoning for loving a man who had built his life on lies. The courthouse loomed like a fortress, its stone facade lined with cameras and reporters hungry for scandal. Claire stepped out of the car, the flashes of cameras blinding her as voices shouted her name. To the world, she was no longer just Claire Wallace. She was the wife who slept beside a monster. Inside, the trial unfolded with the precision of a theater production. The prosecution painted Daniel as a predator who had stalked, manipulated, and destroyed lives under the guise of charm. The journal became the centerpiece, its chilling passages read aloud, each word dripping with calculation. Claire sat rigid, hearing once private fragments of her marriage dissected in the open. The defense, however, was merciless. They hinted at her complicity, suggesting she had looked away for too long, that perhaps she had enjoyed the comforts of his perfection until it became inconvenient. More than once, Claire felt the weight of the jury's eyes on her, as though they were measuring not only Daniel's guilt, but her own. At night, she collapsed alone in her hotel room, her body racked with sobs. Guilt and freedom waged war inside her. She told herself she had done the right thing, that without her, Daniel might never have been caught. Yet another voice whispered darker doubts. Had she been blind, willfully so, until the blood on the rag forced her to see? The media fed those questions relentlessly. Headlines split between sympathy and suspicion. Devoted wife or silent accomplice? Friends avoided her, unsure whether to console or condemn. Even in Daniel's absence, he seemed to control her world, bending the narrative to his shadow. The verdict came swiftly, guilty on all counts. As the judge's gavel fell, Claire felt a crushing mix of relief and sorrow. She looked at Daniel one last time. His eyes, though restrained by handcuffs, still carried that same unnerving calm, as if even in defeat, he had left something behind in her that could never be erased. Outside, the reporters clamored for a statement, but Claire had none to give. Words seemed meaningless. She only wanted silence, A silence unbroken by his voice, his lies, or the weight of his presence. But silence, she would soon learn, carries its own kind of haunting. The trial ended, but Claire's sentence had only just begun. She returned to the house they once shared, the walls still heavy with his presence. Every photograph on the mantel seemed to mock her, frozen smiles from a life she no longer recognized. She considered taking them down, yet her hands trembled each time she tried, as if erasing his face from the frames would also erase her own identity. Nights were the worst. The silence that once signified peace now throbbed with menace. She would lie in bed listening to the hum of the refrigerator, the creak of the settling house, each sound reminding her of the nights she pressed her ear to the study door. Only now there was no locked door, no journal, no husband to suspect, only the hollow echo of memory. The neighbors treated her cautiously, sympathy tangled with unease. Some offered polite condolences, casserole dishes, awkward hugs. Others avoided her altogether, whispering when they thought she couldn't hear. She wasn't just the woman who survived Daniel Wallace. She was the woman who hadn't known, the wife who had lived in the shadow of evil and called it love. Claire spent hours walking alone, her camera slung over her shoulder, though she rarely took photographs anymore. When she did, the images disturbed her. Empty streets at dusk, abandoned playgrounds, broken glass catching the light. It was as though her lens could no longer find beauty, only fragments of decay. She replayed his voice in her mind, the way he had said she was stronger than the others, the way he had insisted that trust was power. Sometimes she woke in a sweat, convinced she heard him whisper her name from the darkness. Other times, she found herself rehearsing conversations that would never happen. What she might have said if she had confronted him earlier, what she might have done differently. Therapists called it trauma, survival guilt. Documentarians called it a story, framing her words with dramatic music and grainy images. To Claire, it was neither. It was her life, fractured into before and after. One evening she sat on the porch watching dusk settle over the neighborhood. A cool breeze rustled the trees, and for a moment she almost believed she was free. But freedom came with its own terror. The knowledge that she had given her trust, her love, to a man who turned both into weapons. Justice had been served. Daniel would never walk free again. And yet his shadow lingered, stitched into her thoughts, etched into her memory. As she stared into the darkening street, she whispered a question she knew would never be answered. How well can we ever truly know the person we love most? The camera of imagination would linger there, her solitary figure framed in silence, haunted not by ghosts but by the memory of intimacy turned to terror. And with that, the story closed as all true crime tales do, not with comfort, but with the chilling reminder that monsters can wear the face of love.